Hey guys, welcome back. You guys like slimy space zombies born from the flesh of mortal beings with nothing but the urge to consume and gather and accumulate to the point where the entire galaxy is assimilated under one ever-hungering species, right? Yeah, I thought so. I mean, who the hell doesn't? So in light of that, today we're taking a look at the true origins of the Flood, how they came to be, and for those who haven't read any extended universe material or are relatively new to my channel, their origin story will add like 17 new layers of depth to the Halo games and Halo universe, and I'm not kidding. So, let's begin. Over 10 million years ago, the universe was densely populated by the Precursors, a sort of god race who seeded the galaxy with the species that we all know today, as well as being the holders of the mantle of responsibility. Many of the species they created became hyper-intelligent, the two most notable being humanity and the Foreigners. The Precursors needed to select the most adept species to pass the mantle down onto when the time was right, and they ultimately chose humanity over the Foreigners as the new stewards of the universe, claiming the Foreigners to be an unworthy holder of such an important title. As you can expect, this kind of pissed the Foreigners off just a little bit, as the two species shared many similarities, and being told they were simply unworthy was quite the blow to their egos and everything that they'd achieved. Ultimately, the Foreigners couldn't stand the thought of being second to humanity by the Precursors, and began a massive sudden rebellion against them. They killed a majority of the Precursors, with the few that managed to escape either putting themselves into suspended animation or turning themselves into a dust that they could then use later to regenerate into their past forms. However, as time passed, this dust began to corrupt, passing on sickness and biological mutations onto anything that came into contact with it. As the mutations and disease spread, the earliest stage of the Flood was formed, and the Precursors vowed to use it to ensure none of their creations would ever rise up against them again. This Flood collective also had a sort of pseudo-leader, a heavily mutated Precursor, who would be sealed in a stasis capsule on the edge of the galaxy for millions of years to come. The Primordial. The Primordial was hyper-intelligent, able to corrupt literally anything from sentient beings to AIs with something known as the Logic Plague, which is essentially a very well-worded red pill. So, the Flood are created from the corrupt remnants of the creators of everything that we know and love. Pretty deep, right? So, let's finish by talking about the first Flood outbreak and how it happened. All the stuff that I just spoke about happened in roughly 10 million BCE, and the next major event with the Flood occurred some 9.9 million years later, in 107,000 BCE. When the Precursors ground themselves down into the dust was put into vials and put on automated starships that were headed towards the Milky Way galaxy. It was on these ships, travelling to the Milky Way, that the dust corrupted. These ships ended up crashing on deserted and inhabited planets on the outer regions of the Milky Way, and ancient humanity were the first to find the vials. After much study, they came to the conclusion that the dust contained organic molecules of an unknown purpose, and that it was mostly a harmless substance. They also noted that it elicited positive effects on lower animals, and they began giving small doses of the dust to the Faru, which were essentially ancient humanity and ancient Sanshayum's version of dogs, I guess you could say, as it caused quite docile behaviour in them. However, little to their knowledge, the powder was altering the genetic code of the Faru, and was fronting as positive behaviour while in the background altering their genome to ultimately dire effects. After several centuries of the Faru's exposure to the powder, furry growths and fleshy protrusions began emerging from them, and other Faru began consuming these growths. They then began suffering genetic deformities, and were ultimately either euthanized or put back into the wild, but sadly, it was already too late. Any humans or ancient Sanshayum that had been in their presence began showing the exact same symptoms. They were infected. These infected began consuming the sick Faru, and carcasses left over became vectors for the infection. When the Faru was no longer enough for them, they moved on to cannibalization and force-feeding uninfected victims until they were big enough to consume. This sick infection began spreading across their star systems, and as it spread, the flood infection began to reshape its victims into different forms that were fit for different roles, such as combat, or gathering biomass, and so many other roles. As the outbreak began to spread even faster, it became stronger, with far more victims and assimilates than anyone could have ever predicted. The flood began taking worlds from ancient humanity incredibly fast, forcing them to retreat through their systems and into the Forerunner systems, which at the time was seen as a grave act of war by the Forerunners, who were completely ignorant of the flood's existence. Eventually, with the ignorance of the Forerunners, the flood helped cause the extinction of ancient humanity. And that's it. That's the origin and first proper outbreak of the flood, which was pretty successful on their part, sadly, leading to the extinction of the race that was supposed to uphold the mantle of responsibility, very ironically passed down to them by the flood's former beings. So I hope you guys enjoyed. As I did say yesterday, I'm working on a new art style video in the background, so expect that probably next weekend. I'm going to try and get it finished this week. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. I really appreciate it, and I'll catch you next time in what will be a truly iconic video.